kind of works really now to be here. I just wanted to quickly tell everyone about Luke, in case you didn't know about Luke. This is a very glowing biog he has here, which is actually, every word of it is justified, in my opinion. He has a celebrated reputation as one of Australia's leading specialist bird guides. And as I said earlier, he's the owner and operator of the multi-award-winning outfit called the NT Bird Specialists Birding and Photographic Safaris. And if you look behind Luke, you will see the poster. So that's the so basically, after fledgling even diploma in natural resources management, he then flew the coop to Western Australia. Where were you actually born, Luke?
I was actually born in a place called Shepparton in Victoria, but I grew up most of my life in Bendigo, which is still in Victoria. But then, and then went to Western Australia, as you were saying.
Okay. For those who don't live in Australia, where is Victoria? Is it northwest, east, south?
It's the southeast of Australia. So if you're familiar with Melbourne, it's about an hour and a half north of Melbourne, I suppose.
Okay, because when you think about Australia and you don't come from Australia, and even if you haven't even been to Australia, you kind of think of it as being one unit. So, for example, when the disastrous forest fires were, raging last year, was it this year even? Last year, wasn't it? People,
both.
People kind of thought that it actually happened across the whole of Australia, so I think it'd be great for you to educate some of us here today who aren't so familiar with Australia. So you went to Western Australia as a warden at the Broome Bird Observatory. That I have heard of, and that's is that in Queensland?
No, so that's in Western Australia. So Broome is in the very north of Western Australia, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. But it's a migratory shorebird mecca. So it's home to thousands and thousands of shorebirds, and during the southern migration, it can get anything up to about 300,000 shorebirds in Roebuck Bay, which is just outside of the actual bird observatory, and it's a brilliant spot to actually to learn all about it.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely amazing. I'd love to go there. And as you say here, it's East Asian Australasian flyway, which is what runs over it. So you rapidly developed a sharp shorebird identification skills and began bird guiding between mudflat sampling, banding, and bush bird surveys. Now, let's go back. How did this all start for you? Where was your moment, as my American friends would say? When was your spark moment, your spark bird, or what triggered it all?
Yeah, well, I suppose what triggered it all was when I was obviously younger. I'm one of four siblings, and quite often, if we were to be shared amongst family, I would quite often go and visit my nan, and she would quite often just sit down with us and I suppose show me and sit down and watch the birds. And there was one time she actually took me out, and we were going out in a place in the Dandenongs, okay, so just out near Melbourne. But we went on a walk, and the moment for me was when we actually came across a superb lyrebird on its lek and performing and mimicking and all sorts. So this bird, I don't know if anybody else is familiar with lyrebirds, but they're absolutely amazing mimickers. And this bird was just performing right beside the path. And so we just stood there and watched it for minutes. And for me, that was it. And so I constantly went back to my nan, just telling her about which birds I've been seeing. And then obviously, well, not obviously, but as I was growing up, I didn't really, I suppose, make it too public that I was a bit of a birder. It seemed a little bit strange at the time, and especially growing up, if you weren't into sport, that was, it was a bit of a taboo sort of subject, I suppose. So secretly, if I went on school camps, I'd have a little bird book, and I'd go and have a bit of a look, and then tuck it back in the bag, and then and then go off and then tick off the birds that I've been seeing. So it didn't really sort of as soon as I went to the Broome Bird Observatory, that's when it just took off and just blossomed from there.
You know what? I'd love to see a lyrebird. I mean, I think everyone remembers seeing the famous lyrebird on the David Attenborough series that was unfortunately imitating chainsaws and camera clicks and stuff. You know, it's a bird that are they pretty big? They're pretty big, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're pretty much, I suppose, the size of a pheasant, I suppose, maybe even a little bit bigger. But they're an impressive bird. And if you're lucky enough to come across one performing at a lek, oh my goodness, it's an amazing sight, absolutely amazing sight. But just to listen to it go from one bird to another and just no separation. It's just laughing kookaburra, then onto, you know, a currawong, onto a whipbird, onto all sorts of things. And it's just one after the other. It's just incredible.
And are there sort of recognised lekking spots that you can go to? Like, would you, for example, are they, for example, let's start again. Are there lyrebirds in the Northern Territory? And if not, or even if there is, do people go to lekking grounds to watch them?
Yeah, I think, first of all, no, not in the Territory. So unfortunately, if you're coming to the Northern Territory and expecting to see a lyrebird, think again. But over on the East Coast, there used to be some pretty good sites, but as you were saying earlier with the fires, it may have altered a few things just because of, obviously, you know, fires in their actual habitat. But also if there's any other places, I don't know of any sort of leks that I'd go to reliably, I suppose. But it's been a while since I've been down there having a look as well.
Okay. So anyway, going back to what you've been doing, your birding HQ is now the tropical urban birders paradise of Darwin, and I've been there with you, the capital of the Northern Territory in Australia, and it's currently one of the safest birding destinations in the world. Why?
I suppose, and I know my good wife has written up that bio, but the reason why, one of the reasons actually, it's one of the safest places, I suppose, especially with the COVID situation going on at the moment, we have no, I suppose, community transmission of the actual corona, so which is great. So we've been very, very fortunate to actually get out, being able to get out and still go to some of our birding grounds. So, and hopefully a little bit later on, we'll be able to get out a little bit further. But at the moment, yeah, it's one of the safest places, unless of course you're going near any waterways, then you've got to be careful.
Exactly. And also the city itself is kind of protruding up into towards Asia, isn't it? It's kind of closer to Asia than other places in Australia, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's regarded as the gateway to Asia for us as well. So, and obviously with a lot of people coming over from overseas, quite often, you know, people will funnel through Singapore and then make their way down to places like Darwin and on forth from there.
Okay. So basically, yes, Singapore's only 4 hours away. So you've been birding for a long time. You spent countless hours in fields. Your dedication is unsurpassed, really. I actually met you. I mean, I think we may have met before, but certainly met you properly. Was it 3 years ago now? I came to Darwin and I was guided by Luke and also taken to Kakadu. And one of my, I mean, I had several outstanding moments during that short trip, 10-day trip. But for me, the most outstanding moment was when I first met you, and I remember saying to you that I have the force, and I said that rare birds can show up, anything could turn up anywhere at any time. I remember you laughed at me at the time, and I said, you'd be laughing at the other side of your face. And I remember the penultimate day of the trip, we were in Darwin, weren't we, on the beach, being bitten alive by sandhoppers or sand fleas, whatever they were. And
sand flies. Yep.
Sand flies, yeah. And I remember we were scanning a bunch of gulls on the beach, and all of a sudden I found a gull, and I said, that looks a bit strange. And then we worked out it was a Franklin's gull, which is a rare vagrant from America, and the force was obviously with us.
Yeah, that's a true story. I'm not going to deny it. And I was eating my hat after that, I must admit, because I didn't think you were going to do it, but right at the very last moment, yep, definitely, you pulled out the old Franklin's gull. So I was very, very impressed.
The thing is with Australia, I mean, I don't know how many people. I mean, I noticed in this in the Zoom room today, there's a few people from Australia, and I wondered how many of them have actually been to Northern Territory. Is Northern Territory a region that is well known amongst Australians? Because when I think about Spain, where I am, for example, Extremadura, um, people in Spain even don't know much about Extremadura. So what's the reputation of Northern Territory?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they've definitely heard of it, and they definitely. I think it's almost like the equivalent of Texas in the US, of where everything's bigger. And so I think the Northern Territory is a bit along those lines of where, yeah, you'll get, the big NT, but quite a few people. I mean, when you've got places like Kakadu National Park, or sites, or I suppose things like Uluru. Okay, this is, yeah, they're iconic places that a lot of Australians have heard about. And if anybody's actually seen Crocodile Dundee, this has also put the Northern Territory on the map as well. So, in particular, Kakadu for that matter.
Yeah, because what's interesting talking about that stuff, I remember when I first met you, you weren't married to your wife yet, you were both engaged to be married. And you told me about the time when you went, I think, did you get engaged and you went to see Sarah's parents or something? And did you go to across the other side of Australia? How long did it take you?
Yeah, it took us about 3 days to journey down there. So, yeah, it was a bit of a nerve-wracking moment, I must admit, of where we decided we were going to spend Christmas with the family, and then of course we decided to do the road trip, so straight down the Stuart Highway. And I think it either took us about 2 or 3 days until we got down there. I'd only just come back from South America, so I had a big beard as well, so I wasn't looking, well, I didn't think I was looking too clean or anything. And Sarah was very determined that, we had to go and see her folks first, and it was fair enough. But yeah, so I went in like this woolly creature, going in and meeting her folks for the first time, and it was, yeah, quite embarrassing. But no, it was all great in the end. So it was very, very funny.
Now, I know we're going to talk about Northern Territory, but where else do you actually lead tours, or where else do you go in the world to go birding?
So not only the Northern Territory, and we're going to touch on it today as well, sort of going over towards the Kimberley, which is over in Western Australia, towards Broome. So you'll get to see where that is, David. So that's all good. But also we head over to Sri Lanka as well. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about Sri Lanka at this particular point, but yeah, it's an amazing place, bird watching wise. It's just incredible. So for the time being, that's where we do our birding and travels.
Okay. Well, listen, let's crack on then. Let's have a look at the Northern Territories. I'm sure that people would like to see more about the region. Before we actually do that, I just wondered, are there any questions at this point from anyone for Luke? No? Okay. Luke, you're on.
All right. Let me just put this on. All right. Are we all good? Sorry, David.
Say again.
Are we all good?
Yeah, I can see. We can see the first page of your presentation.
Yeah. That's all good. All right. Well, thank you so much, David, on your lovely introduction as well. You're very, very kind. But today, folks, I'm going to give you a virtual birding tour around, obviously, our backyard, which is the Northern Territory and beyond. But just here we go. So we've talked about her, but this is the team at NT Bird Specialists, and this is, of course, my lovely wife, Sarah, the more attractive half of NT Bird Specialists, that's for sure. But we're an award-winning team, taking small birding groups around, having a look throughout the region, and also specialising in bird photography as well. But we go around basically we have a few vehicles at hand, which is obviously very, very handy for different types of touring, such as our four-wheel drive. Also, our little minivan that we can take around, obviously small groups of people as well. But where we actually stay, especially when we're on tour, it's generally fully accommodated. And obviously where we can, we try to use indigenously owned accommodation as well. So yeah, obviously benefiting the community in that way. But we try and make sure that we get the most or maximize our full time out in the field. And this is where, of course, we have our meals all set up out in the field so you don't miss an opportunity to see absolutely anything out there, which is fantastic. And when you've got settings like this, it's any wonder that, you know, we have our lunches or breakfasts out in the field. But what I've been doing in the past couple of years as well is also encouraging birding to a lot of groups. So things like seniors around in Darwin. So we're taking them out on little morning trips, just so showing them about the local birds in their region and also getting them active as well. But also things like Kakadu Bird Week, of where we try to introduce obviously birding to all sorts of different clientele. And so the actual demographic is quite varied. And so making it interesting for everybody to actually get out there and also appreciate your birds. However, this is where we really start to get into it, but our birding adventures in, of course, our big backyard. Now, David, I know, obviously being an urban birder, and I'm going to start off with one that's actually been lucky enough to be nesting in our backyard at the moment. So I'm not going to travel too far, but first, for those who don't know, obviously, about Australia, and David was obviously asking about a little bit more information. As you can see on the East Coast, okay, this is where they've actually had quite a few of the fires, which has been very, very unfortunate. For us, we've been very, very lucky in the north, where you can see Darwin is located. We actually do controlled burning all throughout the dry season. So it removes a lot of the fire fuel so that later on in the year, if there are any lightning strikes, hopefully the burning that's been done beforehand doesn't have those big impactful fires. But the Northern Territory, it's just outlined now so you can see on the map. But the Northern Territory is about 6 times the size of the UK. And just for a bit of scale, I've just put them on the actual, on the map there. So you can see there's one, and there's about 6 of them on the Northern Territory. So it gives you a bit of an idea of how big the Northern Territory actually is. But these are the little journeys that we'll be looking at taking, and I'll be just taking you through a few of them with you today. But around Darwin, okay, and this is where, of course, we met David for the very first time, and he was obviously doing some shooting of some beautiful, not only birds, but also wildlife in the region. And this is when we had a few flying foxes streaming overhead, which was quite a remarkable sight, and one that obviously sticks in my mind in particular, and David's eyes just going, wow. But enough about the mammals. And as I was saying, this is the little guy that we have in our backyard at the moment. This is actually a striated pardalote, which has taken residence in our backyard. And we're very, very fortunate to have a pair of them just nesting in the backyard. But beyond our backyard, we have, of course, the coastal region. And funny enough, this is actually very, very close to where you're talking about the Franklin gull, which actually turned up. But Shoal Bay is a key biodiversity area. Okay, so the reason why it's a key biodiversity area is actually for shorebirds, and one in particular, which is great knot. And the knot come here in their thousands, and in this particular image, you can see there's quite a few red knot in there as well, and this is all just in breeding plumage, which is quite spectacular. But when you get flocks of anything about 3,000 to 4,000 knots all together and then taking off, oh, it's just quite remarkable. Now, of course, these birds travel about 10,000 kilometres all the way down from the Arctic tundra or the Russian tundra. Unfortunately, they are absolutely exhausted when they get here, and it's easy prey for birds or predatory birds such as white-bellied seagulls, which will come along and take it. And unfortunately, this godwit was unfortunately taken by it. But the other pressures that these birds have, and which we're trying to do a bit of, I suppose, education about this area, is actually the dog walkers on the actual beach. We're actually trying to make sure that a lot of the local dog owners just keep the actual dogs off these beaches, making sure that the shorebirds have an area that they can rest and relax and obviously build up enough muscle for their northern migration later on. So this is one of the real, I suppose, pressures that the actual shorebirds have. Now, just from the actual, from the coast, we also have the beautiful mangroves. Now, Darwin, out of Australia's, I think it's about 41 species that Australia have of mangroves. Darwin's got about 36 species found within the harbour. So there's quite a few species which are really, I suppose, they're just specialists, I suppose, within the actual mangroves. Now, one of those species in particular that a lot of birders really want to come and check out is what's known as obviously the Chestnut Rail. Now, this bird, it's not much bigger than a chicken, but quite often just running around on the mudflats. And I don't think we got to see one of these, David, did we?
No, we didn't, no.
No, sorry. But we're going to have to catch up on that one for you. But I'm sure we actually saw this one, though, the beachstone curlew, which came wandering out. But from the coast, okay, you've also got to be very, very careful of, as I was saying earlier, things like our snapping handbags. So with saltwater crocodiles being quite prevalent in the Northern Territory, you just want to make sure you don't end up like this barramundi, that's for sure. So always stay clear of the water or be in a boat where it's nice and safe. That's the better way of seeing them. But Darwin itself, we're very, very fortunate to have a fantastic botanic gardens. Now, this particular botanic gardens, as like many other around Australia, they play host, or play home, I should say, to nocturnal birds, and Darwin Botanic Gardens is no different. And we're very, very fortunate to have the second largest owl of Australia. And David, I'm pretty sure you actually got to see probably even this individual actually. So, but this is the beautiful rufous owl.
Yeah, we saw two, I remember rightly.
Ah, that's right. Yep. So they're an absolutely stunning owl, but they'll be actually preying on things like the flying foxes that we saw earlier, which were flying over your head, but a really, really impressive bird. But from Darwin, it's only a short little trip into a place, into our beautiful national parks. So Kakadu National Park, as I was saying, it really was put on the map with the movie like Crocodile Dundee, but it is World Heritage listed and it's an absolutely birding mecca. And one of the reasons is for its wetlands. Now, all of the wetlands in Kakadu National Park, they're all Ramsar listed wetlands. So when you can get to a place like showing here, of where there's just magpie geese in their thousands and they just congregate feeding en masse. And when you step out of the car heading towards these wetlands, it's almost like a beehive just buzzing around. The geese are just honking just over in the distance. And it's just, an amazing spectacle at that time of year. But from the magpie geese, you also have some beautiful, white-bellied seagulls, which will be patrolling around the area. And from one of our bigger raptors to one of our smaller birds, which are found on the wetlands, are little kingfishers. And they're quite cryptic little birds, but it's around about the second smallest or amongst the second smallest kingfishers in the world. They are truly quite remarkable. Now, we've also got the skulking things like black bittens, but also iconic species like dancing brolga and also black-necked storks, which obviously a lot of Australians still love to call the jabiru, which is not a jabiru, but they are really just magic birds out on these floodplains. Now, another species which you can find out there wandering across the lily pads are comb-crested jacanas. And I'm positive we did get to see these, David, as they were wandering around and just gorgeous. I don't know if did we get to see any with chicks?
We did, yeah. We took photographs of chicks and it's fantastic, absolutely memorable.
Yeah, they're just absolutely spectacular birds. So, yeah, very, very fortunate to see them on the actual wetlands. But Kakadu does have multiple different environments all through it as well. It's got about 6 major environments. So I'm only going to run through a couple with you today. But the Monsoon Forest these are small little pockets and they hold little gems. And when I'm talking about little gems, you're not only looking up in the trees, but you're also looking on the floor. And what you're actually looking at, or can be looking for, are these little guys, okay? Rainbow pitters, which will be bouncing around in the leaf litter. So when you're not looking on the ground, keep an eye up in the sky because, well, not in the sky, up in the treetops, and you may get to see one of these beautiful fruit doves, which is the rose crown fruit dove. Now, this image almost, I suppose I can relate to this. It sort of looks like me when it's mango season and I'm trying to shovel down as many mangoes as I possibly can. But this rose crown fruit dove, yeah, they are frugivores and spreading obviously a lot of seeds as they go from little monsoon pockets to monsoon pockets. So they're a really absolutely gorgeous little bird. But we're really, really lucky in places like Kakadu as well, because it's incredibly rich with the Aboriginal culture. Okay, so the local binning culture being around for about 65,000 years. And so when you're looking at pieces of artwork all through there, you could be looking at the artwork, and then when you look above, you may be lucky enough and to have things like black-banded fruit doves, which is an endemic species to the Arnhem Land escarpment. And also another endemic is white-lined honeyeater, also chestnut-quilled rock pigeons. Still going with these endemics, these are variegated fairy wrens, okay, otherwise known as purple-backed fairy wrens, but also a species which are found only in the stone country. Now, one of the biggest birds, I suppose, that a lot of people are really looking for within Kakadu are white-throated grass wrens. And I've been fortunate enough to go out touring, or sorry, not touring, but also going out surveying with Kakadu National Park, and have actually come across a couple of pairs of these particular species, of the actual white-throated grass wren, which are absolutely incredible. Probably one of the highlight birds of me for Kakadu. But from there, we then head through the tropical savanna woodlands. Now, the woodlands are really prolific in a lot of bird life, okay, all throughout. And it's actually probably the most biodiverse environment, I suppose you could say, throughout the actual top end. But things like partridge pigeon, okay, and also the endemic hooded parrots are quite good found within this region. Now, these parrots, they also nest in termite mounds as well, which is quite remarkable. But other seed feeders, I should say, things like starfinch, and the beautiful, and one of my personal favourites is a Gordian finch. Okay, and if you're lucky enough to ever come across one of these, I know David's itching to see one of these nice and close, especially in a red face form. But yeah, it's one that we'll be definitely keeping an eye out through here. But some of the other smaller birds are fairy wrens. Okay, so the smallest fairy wren, the redback fairy wren, is quite prolific. And if you keep an eye out, especially closely in the cane grass, you may be lucky enough to come across purple crown fairy wrens as well. But you may hear disturbance from the top. Okay, if you're in the tree, well, looking in the treetops, keep an eye out for one of a rare species of raptors. Now, the Red Goshawk, I've been lucky enough to keep an eye on a pair for the past 4 years, where they've successfully fledged at least three young. So this is one of the rarest species of raptors that we have in Australia, and we're very lucky to have a couple of these nesting in the region. So really are a remarkable bird. But red-winged parrots could be also on the food source list for the actual red goshawk. But keep an eye out for these little green bullets as well, because when you see budgerigars, they are just, super quick. And if you're lucky enough to come across them, maybe in flocks of 100 or even thousands, to see them do murmurations is just, absolutely phenomenal. But it's just these green blurs all coming down. And if you're beside a waterhole, even better. They'll just come down all en masse and come up and down, have a drink for 2 seconds, and then they're off again. So it's not only spectacular birds when you're moving through this country, the countryside itself, the views are just really, really dramatic. And the Victoria River is it's one of my personal favourite areas to go through. But from there, if you're travelling further west, and David, if you watch the little van go through, it ends up in where I used to work in Broome. So this is actually where I sort of cut my teeth on migratory shorebirds. But the Kimberley is home to quite a few species that a lot of birdwatchers love to come and have a look for. Normally, though, the adventures start right on the border of the NT in Western Australia at Lake Argyle. And this is home to, the lake itself is Australia's man-made largest lake, but it's home to about 25,000 freshwater crocodiles. So lucky they're not man-eaters, so you can definitely wade through fully and safe. It's all good. But it's also a home to one of Australia's more sought after birds, which is the yellow chat. And this is one that, as you can see, it is a glorious little bird in itself. But once again, this stunning scenery that you go through the Kimberley is one that a lot of people also, they love to just take in. When you're going through, you can actually get some beautiful views, not only of obviously escarpments, but also waterfalls, but also another style of artwork over there as well, which is guion artwork. What's really amazing in the Kimberley, the northern part, which is called the Mitchell Plateau, it's almost like the sister environment, I suppose you could say, of Kakadu National Park. The similarities are very, very close. The actual environment, the woodlands, there's similar species of trees that you find in both, but it's also very, very similar species of birds that you find there as well, and some which are slightly different. I'm just going to go through a few of them with you now. We saw the white-throated grass wren in Kakadu. Over in the Kimberley, in the Mitchell Plateau, or on the Mitchell Plateau, they have what's called the black grass wren. Okay, so very, very similar, just lacking obviously the white on the throat. They also have a partridge pigeon. Instead of having the red facial skin, they've also got the yellow facial skin. They also got the Kimberley honeyeater, which is, it almost looks exactly like the white-lined honeyeater. And also, of course, the white-quilled rock pigeon. So instead of having these beautiful chestnut dots in the wings when they're flying, these will have beautiful white dots in the wings. But one of my favorite things about getting to places like this, and it is so remote that you will have to camp out quite often in some beautiful remote country. Now, instead of staying in a 5-star accommodation, you are literally in a 1,000,000-star accommodation as you look up and the stars are just that clear. It is just one of my favorite places to actually get out and have a look at. But another one, another journey, we're actually doing only this half. I know there's a fellow online at the moment. I'm having a look at him. But we're teaming up together, doing a journey heading over towards Cairns. So David, hello. I can see you down there. But this little journey takes in some beautiful areas. And we're very, very fortunate to move through some really, well, the beauty about the Northern Territory is that the environments are so varied. You can come across landscapes of where it looks like it's got nothing out there. And the Barkly Tablelands is one of those areas of where there's virtually no trees. You may come across little dams like this of where it's all just stocked for cattle, but those little water holes are absolute gems for birds coming into. So if you sit there quietly and just wait and see what comes in, you may be lucky enough to get things like spinifex pigeon wandering through, these quirky little apostle birds, which are always having a bit of a chatter as they're walking around in groups of 10 or 12, but they're fantastic birds. Australian bustards, they may come wandering through as well, but also keep an eye out for Australia's largest bird of prey. Now, the wingspan on these, they're anything up to about 2.8 metres, so they're a huge, huge bird, and of course, they'll be quite often feeding on carrion, so keep an eye out if you're driving yourself. Make sure you slow down when you see these birds because it takes them a really, really long time to get up off the road and then, of course, head off towards, towards safety, I suppose. One bird in particular, I must admit, this is one that is quite often called or referred to as the grey ghost. Now, the grey falcon, it has eluded many people as they've gone out looking for them. Some people believe it's just a figment of imagination. I've been lucky enough to come across a few of them, and I can tell you they are real and they are an amazing raptor. And this is also one of Australia's rarest species. So along that journey, there's a very, very good chance of actually seeing that particular species. Now, no birding journey would be complete if you didn't include Sewerage Works. And I know, David, some of your favourite places to go and check it out, the Sewerage Works. But one at Mount Isa, there's also a few, along the actual way, places like Tennant Creek as well. But they're not the actual little hotspots that we're looking for at this particular journey. What we're really looking for around Mount Isa in particular are grass wrens. And Kalkadoon grass wren, that's one particular species, but the gem of the area as well is Carpentarian grass wren. And of course, these will be living in spinifex, rocky areas. And of course, they're very, very shy and very, very coy as they sort of move through the spinifex country. But from the actual, I suppose, the opposite end of Darwin in the Northern Territory, heading right down into the centre of Australia around Alice Springs. It's another favourite of ours of actually heading down there, especially when you've got such dramatic landscapes of blue skies and red earth and spinifex around everywhere. It can be tough birding, and quite often you don't think that it'll hold much, but it is really alive. And the actual colours of some of the birds down there, like splendid fairy wren, red-capped robins, even another species of grass wren, dusky grass wren. It's just an amazing place, and one of my personal favourites for a cockatoo. Oh, that's all right. I thought it was coming up, but it'll come up soon. But around these water holes, okay, I've just tripped up on my own presentation, but around the actual water holes, around the red centre, it's always worth, once again, keeping an eye out for finches, okay, so painted finch, zebra finches, and hopefully that's the one, this pink cockatoo, or Major Mitchell. And as you can see, they are just absolute characters, and they're just absolutely glorious, glorious birds. But I'm just going to finish off with this particular species, the grey honeyeater. It's one that obviously it's eluded a lot of people. They are very, very shy. They're not very brightly coloured, but it's actually one that, once again, a lot of birders will be heading around and hunting for around that particular region, but they are there. And they're, yeah, in my books, they're a pretty spectacular little bird. But quite often we actually get the question of when's the best time to visit the Northern Territory? And I'm going to be pretty biased here and say any time is a good time to come birding in the Northern Territory. Even in the wet season, you get a lot of migratory species coming through, especially from Southeast Asia, and especially a lot of migratory or shorebirds coming through. So it is quite spectacular in that sense. But any time from around about April to about November is probably our peak sort of birding time, but where it's a little bit drier as well. But yeah, it's an absolutely amazing place. But I'd like to, thank you all, and thank you, David, for the opportunity. But if I'm just, absolutely, I don't know if you can probably tell, I'm just probably busting at the moment here, just saying how good and how amazing these places are. And honestly, the Northern Territory, Kimberley, even over into Queensland, these are spectacular places to birding. And if you're ever interested in having a look at some of these places, get in contact with David. It is just an amazing place. But that is all, David.
Well, that's amazing. Graham King here says that you showed him his first ever red goshawk. I didn't actually get to see one, unfortunately. But what struck me about birding there is the sheer number of stuff, and I was just so confused. I was asking you every 2 minutes, what's that? What's this? What's that? I felt like a complete beginner. Great. It's nice to feel like that because it's, you learn so much more. Anyone would like to ask any questions regarding the birds of Northern Territory? Or is it too early in the morning for you guys? So maybe.
No, there's one.
Morning, Luke. Can you hear me?
Brian.
Hello.
That's right. As a young lad, I used to keep cage birds, and one of the birds was the Gordian Finch, very popular in the UK. Now there was about 3 different colour variations. Do you get all those colour variations in the Northern Territories?
Yeah, Brian, that's a good question. We do get the 3 different varieties. So we've got the black face form, we've got the red face form, and if you're extremely lucky, there's also the golden or the yellow face form. So I've only had a fleeting glimpse of the yellow face, and I'm really itching to see up nice and close, of course, the yellow face. Did they used to breed quite easily for you, Brian?
The yellow face were very difficult. They were the hardest ones to breed. But the red face ones were quite easy. We also used to keep grass finches, hex grass finches, diamond sparrows. He's showing a picture is David. Yeah, the grass finches will be in the, obviously, are they in the Northern Territories as well?
Yeah, they sure are. They sure are. So we've got over 10 different species of grass finches, Brian. So yeah, we've got, I think, obviously,
Fantastic.
if you, yeah, it's an amazing place to actually see them. So yeah.
Good.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Brian. Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Alan, you have a question, I believe.
Northern Territories looks absolutely fantastic, and obviously is. I was just wondering if there's like a downside to it all. I mean, what sort of things are under threat there? What's the impact of climate change and pollution and such things, and what's happening to sort of address those types of issues?
Yeah, climate change is an interesting one here, I must admit. I mean, they're obviously experiencing quite a little bit of different weather-wise down at places like Alice Springs, or where they're longer droughts or drier droughts. I know they've actually had a bit of rain earlier this year. Up here in the Northern Territory, we're seeing things like sea level rise as well. So that could have a major impact if you're finding that the sea level rise comes up. And then, of course, if it gets into the freshwater floodplains, what that'll do is actually cause what's called saltwater intrusion. So it'll actually kill off a lot of the native plants, which then obviously will then push a lot of the species which rely on those places or the plants off into different areas. So it could have a really devastating effect if the sea levels rise and get into the freshwater floodplains.
But not much an effect as yet. Is that what you're saying?
To be honest with you, I haven't seen too much of a great effect, I must admit, with the actual yeah, I haven't seen too much effect of it. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you very much, Alan. Anyone else with a question? You're obviously very well versed with Northern Territory.
I've got a question.
Oh, Claire.
Hi, Luke.
Hello.
As you mentioned that it's great for migration, presumably that's the sort of Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere migration, and Australia's a destination as such. Is there much internal migration from the north to the south of the country, east to west, as it's such a massive country?
Yeah, good question, Claire. I mean, we're seeing a little bit of migration movement happening now, just within Australia, from species from down south, where it starts to get a little bit cooler. We're starting to get a little bit cooler conditions up here as well. So we're finding a few birds that you'll find down around things like Alice Springs. They're actually coming up further north. So things like a few of the honeyeaters have moved through. We're getting cuckoos, which are moving up as well. So we definitely do find that in what we call the dry season, which is happening now. So that's when our cooler conditions happen. As soon as it starts warming up down south, those birds will then return further south as well. So we do find that it's not only the migratory species moving north and south, we do find a lot of the species within Australia as well will move north and south.
Is that good, Claire?
Yeah, that's good. It's interesting. When you say cooler, how's that in relative terms in Australia?
Yeah.
We always see Australia as being sort of dry and hot and sunny.
Yeah, true. At the moment in the Northern Territory, so our daytime temperatures are around about 32, 34 degrees Celsius. Overnight, we're starting to see it cool down to around about 19 degrees. So for us, that's getting quite cool, and we've got to put more blankets on the bed, etc. But in the actual, I suppose, times like around about November, okay, especially in what we call the build-up, you'll get daytime temperatures, and this is if you're going inland, so not so much on the coast, but when you're going inland, it can be daytime temperatures of probably high 30s into the low 40s, and overnight it cools down to a nice 35 degrees. So that's, yeah, it can be pretty warm during that particular time. I can see a few faces now actually just squirming at the thought. But, but believe me, the birding at that particular time is absolutely remarkable, because obviously if you're around any water source at that particular time, birds are just flocking to it. And so obviously we've got the creature comforts of air-conditioned beds at night time, so it makes it a lot easier, air-conditioned vehicles. But when you're sitting out there and just observing obviously the wildlife and how they behave, it's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, I remember when I came out how hot it was. I thought, how can people live in Darwin? It's so bloody hot.
Yeah, I remember the first time you were here, David, and yeah, there's a bit of sweat coming out, but but you got there in the end, so it was quite good, quite good. But
Yeah.
I see a question as well, just on the actual chat line from Emma, but just asking about things like cane toads. Okay, we've actually got cane toads have moved right across from obviously Queensland, where they were introduced back in the 1930s. But they've spread right throughout the Northern Territory, and they're now continually spreading all the way across to Western Australia. So these are a species which are, well, it's really, really devastating on the environment. What we're seeing at the moment, obviously, when I first started guiding up here back in 2001, we used to see quite a few species of bigger deadly snakes, goannas, quolls, which are a small little marsupial or mammal, but they'll be absolutely everywhere. As soon as the toads came through, my last quoll that I saw was probably about 13 to 14 years ago. So it's been a long time between drinks, but people are starting to see these species coming back. So, and some of the bigger, deadlier snakes like king browns and death adders, they're starting to make a little bit of recovery with people sighting them as well. So it's amazing to see, I suppose, maybe a little bit of evolution of where they're actually, or being learned, obviously, about the actual cane toad and the effects that they obviously have. But it is a massive, massive issue. And unfortunately, yeah, it's one of those things that's incredibly hard to stop. When you consider one female, she can produce anything up to about 30,000 eggs in one sitting. And so there are 30,000 toadlets going around everywhere, and they've got enough toxins to actually kill whatever tries to eat them. So it's really, really difficult times for a lot of the actual species. But it seems that they are starting to bounce back, which is a little glimmer of hope.
Luke, how do you counter when people say that Australia is probably the most deadliest place on the planet when it comes to walking?
If it's the most deadliest place on the planet, it's one of the most exciting places on the planet, that's for sure. But look, I think if you're lucky enough to even come across any of these species, things like your snakes and spiders, as long as you're within a safe distance and you're not trying to harass or harm it, it's a really, for me, it's a pleasure and a privilege to actually see them. They're just incredible species as they're going about, and quite often you'll just come across them and they'll be just wandering around doing what they do naturally, which is really quite amazing. But for the most dangerous or deadliest place on earth, I don't know about that, but yeah, I just love it.
Yeah, because you often hear about the spiders and for example, you're talking about the what do you call them? The handbags, the biting handbags?
Oh, yeah, the snapping handbags.
Snapping handbags. I mean, that in itself is pretty scary, I suppose. But then that has a benefit, I suppose, because it means that people don't go too close to the water's edge, which means that some species can sort of, do their thing without, feeling threatened in any way, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also a good sign that it's a healthy environment as well. When you've got all these big apex predators around, you know that there's obviously enough food source for them. So there's enough things keeping these apex predators around. So it's really, really positive seeing these things. And I don't think there's anybody who doesn't really like seeing, if you get the opportunity of seeing a big crocodile while you're in a boat, a good big boat, a safe boat, but to see some of these creatures out in the wild, it is truly magic just to see them as they cruise around.
Yeah, because when I came, was it the yellow water? Was it that?
Yep.
Yellow water, what's it called? The actual reserve, yellow water.
Yeah, the yellow water boat cruise, so that's on the South Alligator River, but it's at Kawinda there, and it's the animal life there. They're just so habituated to boats and to people. They just don't worry about anybody. And of course, the boats basically give way to the animals. So they know sort of where they sit in the ranking as well.
Yeah, because they seem pretty impressive as they slowly, menacingly swam or drifted towards us. It's quite, it was a bit of an eye opener. Mammals are also very interesting. You mentioned a couple previously, but I didn't realise. I mean, I knew about wallabies and kangaroos, but I never heard of a wallaroo before. I thought you were making it up when I first turned up. And there was one species in particular. Was it the black wallaroo?
The black wallaroo. The black
Yeah.
wallaroo. So that's an endemic, once again, to the Stone Country, and it's not much bigger than a wallaby, I suppose. But it is actually the smallest wallaroo species, but they're really, really incredible. I mean, when you have the males, which are this charcoal black color, and the females are grey with black paws, it's just so cute. And if you're lucky enough to come across a little, I suppose, a female that's got a little male joey, it's just gorgeous seeing this little head poke out, and it's just, oh, I just love it.
So what's the difference between a wallaby and a wallaby and a wallaroo? What's the difference?
All right, so we have many different species of macropods all throughout Australia, okay? And generally, okay, if you're looking at the different gaits and the different bone structure, etc., but your kangaroos, this is just an easy sort of way. Your kangaroos are your biggest, and then of course it drops down in size to wallaroo, drops down in size to wallaby, and then it goes down into things like rock wallabies, bettongs, quokkas, paddy melons, rat kangaroos, all sorts of things going all the way down. So it's, yeah, basically a size different, but you will also see the foot size is also, yeah, much, much different, but they're big, big feet.
I didn't realise that wallaroos are bigger than wallabies. Emma Sylvester says that there are also bunyips too. What the hell is a bunyip? Was it a bunny ip? A bunny ip or bunyip?
No. Bunyip. So this is it's a creature that, I suppose, yeah, it's a bit of it's along the lines of drop bears, if you've ever heard of drop bears. Okay, and when you're over in Australia next, I'll have to talk to you about drop bears, David, and how dangerous they can be. But bunyips, yeah, it's sometimes people refer to, you could imagine early explorers and of course camping outside, or just even early settlers, of where they're listening to sounds at nighttime. And there's some birds over here of where at nighttime they'll be screaming like a child. But one bird in particular that they call a Bunya Bird, sometimes they refer to as bitterns, okay, that big booming sort of call, of which they refer to as the Bunya Bird. But no, bunyips are a bit of a mythical creature, sort of like, I suppose, the Yeti as well. But yeah, one to keep you, well, the children scared when they're going to bed, that's for sure.
And the other thing is, I remember being in Kakadu, and for a couple of nights, I thought there was loads of dogs everywhere. And I said to you, I remember asking you, are there dogs around here? Are they dingoes? And you said, no, they're barking owls.
That's it. That's it.
Really sounded.
It's, yeah. Oh, yeah. Can you make that sound for us, David?
Woohoo! 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 Right.
That's it.
Before I embarrass myself anymore, anyone else for any questions for Luke? No? Okay.
Hello. Hello, Lee. I can see familiar faces from down in Bendigo, Victoria.
Okay. Oh, Lee has got a question. He's just waving.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. I need to ask you a couple of questions then. So, obviously, Australia is your place, your country. What is your favourite bird?
That's a tough one. I'm going to go with my favourite when I was a kid, I must admit, would be crested shrike tit.
Crested shrike tit.
Crested shrike tit.
No idea what that looks like, but I'll take your word for that. And whilst I'm looking for a picture, what is your favourite mammal?
Favourite mammal, I'd say Lombok glider, which is a variety of sugar glider that we have up here.
Why?
I'm just amazed to see mammals in particular, especially when this particular glider, like many gliders obviously around the world, but having that thin membrane of skin going in between their legs, and when they're climbing up obviously the trees and then shooting off over to the next tree, they'll just stick out their legs and then glide all the way across. And yeah, they're just cute little bundles.
And have you got a favourite, just out of interest, a favourite reptile?
Oh, frillneck lizard for me.
Oh yeah. Yes, I've had a few experiences with frilled-necked lizards as well. Yeah, one scared the bejesus out of me when I pointed at it. It just suddenly shot up the tree, and they're pretty big birds as well. Reptiles as well. And finally, have you, just out of interest, have you got a favourite plant?
Yeah, green plum. It's a native species up here of where they fruit just before wet season, and they come out in these tiny, tiny little plums, and it's one of the sweetest bush tuckers that you can find out here. So yeah, if you find a tree, give it a little shake, and then all the ripe ones will come falling off it, and it's just, yeah, beautiful to actually eat. Have you found it?
Yeah, this is a crested.
Go up, go up.
Is that it?
No, that's crested bellbird. Go up further. Further, up, not, oh, sorry, go down, go down. Yeah, there we go, there we go.
Very pretty, very pretty. And bush tucker is another thing. You always, when you think of Australia, you think of that sort of stuff. Is it really as prominent as, or a thing that people do in Australia? Do most people actually get involved in bush tucker? Tucker?
Yeah, tucker. I think we're very, very lucky up here because there's still that strong connection to country as well, and having a lot of knowledge out there and learning from the local Aboriginal people. It's quite amazing to see what you can actually eat out there. And yeah, some of the bush tucker, some of it can be a little bit sour and very tart, but one of my favorites in particular is definitely, the green plum. They're just real sweet. They're just gorgeous.
And if you could be anywhere in this whole world, notwithstanding COVID, where would you be right now?
Oh, I'd have to say, somewhere in the world of where I could be watching, hopefully, birds of paradise. So whether it's West Papua or somewhere like that, that would be, yeah. If it could take me there right now, that'd be amazing.
Okay. Anyone else for any questions at all? Whilst you're kind of thinking of your question, let me just quickly remind you what's coming up in the series. The next one is actually going to be, what day is today? Wednesday. Tomorrow's Thursday. My good friend Balázs, who's Hungarian, and he's going to be talking about birding in Mongolia. And then on Sunday, we got a guy called Julio Delgado, who's talking about birding in Colombia. And the following Monday, 25th, we have Per Ahlström, who's a Swedish ornithologist, and he'll be talking about taxonomy, talking about what other species are out there. He's actually discovered or co-discovered 7 new birds to science. I don't know why people call me all the time. Yeah, on Tuesday we've got Matthew Young talking about finches. He's a world expert on finches. And Harriet Mead is on Wednesday, the 27th. And then we've got on Thursday, Miriam Darlington. Harriet Mead, by the way, she does sculptures made out of raw iron. And then we have Stephen Moss on Friday as well, talking about nature writing. So we've got a full pack of stuff to do there. No more questions, I take it? Actually, let's just check the chat. Everyone's saying fantastic guide. Well, that's for sure.
Just want to say thank you and say hello to Jonathan and Barbara out there as well.
Great. And also, yeah, thank you very much, actually, Luke, for coming along and sparing your time. All I can say is everyone take care and keep looking up. Go to Northern Territory, hang out with Luke. He knows what he's doing totally. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you very much. I hope to see you guys again. I'm going to put it into open gallery now. If you wish to sort of have an informal chat with Luke, then feel free.
Hi, Luke. I've got another question. be, I mean, there's so many amazing birds and different colours, and it looks very sort of tropical. How many bird species are there either roughly in the Northern Territories or Australia as a whole?
Yeah, so in the Northern Territory, you're looking at around about 450 different species. So that's just within the Northern Territory itself. If you're looking in Australia, I think it's up to about, I think there's resident 750 odd species that'll breed here. However, if you're including a lot of the vagrants, it's over 900 species that can be found in Australia.
And how many have you seen?
That's a very good question, Claire. I've got to go through and actually tick them off. I'm a bit behind. I'm estimating around maybe 550 if I'm lucky. So we'll see how we go. I've got a few to catch up on, that's for sure. But yeah, it's always good to have a few that you need to go and get. It means that you need to get out and have a look.
That's amazing. Thanks.
No worries.
So this is the after show party bit. So feel free, ask whatever you fancied asking, but you couldn't ask before, because now we all know each other. You know, all I can say is that the region is amazing. I've been there once, and I want to go back. In fact, we were planning to do a tour this year that unfortunately was hit the track. What's the word? Hit the wall, I suppose. Because sorry,
hit the bumpers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was thinking something else, but hit the bumpers. Because of the forest fires that were sort of putting off other people coming to Australia, because they just thought that the fire was across the whole of Australia. But then it was the nail was totally put in the coffin. The final nail was the unfortunate incidents of the pandemic. So I'm just hoping that next year we can restage this, because, you know, it's amazing going out and seeing all these different. It's just mind-blowing, the amounts of wildlife. I mean, going to Kakadu especially was fascinating. You know, the fruit bats, you know, all those beautiful birds. Incredible.
Yeah, it truly is a biodiversity hotspot. There's things there that you just don't find anywhere else in the world. So I think, in the way of endemism, it's really quite remarkable. Places like Kakadu in particular, but the rest of the Northern Territory has still got a lot of little hidden secrets around. So yeah, get out there and check them out.
Good.
I've got a question.
Oh, Charlie.
Yeah, that's all right. Okay. Obviously, to get the most out of such a holiday, it helps to be prepared with some idea of the birds you're looking at. When you're totally unfamiliar with all the birds in the country, and you want to start that process, how do you do it? You don't just pick up a field guide and flick through it. Do you? Or is there an easier way of just becoming familiar with the different families and locations and things? How would you prepare to get the most out of a trip?
Yeah, I suppose everybody has their own little techniques. I personally like, if you've got a field guide, to actually go through it. It's almost like bedtime reading of going through. And if you know the regions that bingo. If you know the region that you're going to, you can actually just make little sticky tabs on those pages and then go through, flick and have a look, and then just, you know, read up about it may describe different habits of the bird, or especially the habitat that you'll find the bird in. So it gives you a bit of an idea. But yeah, it's definitely, for me, the hardest thing, I must admit, is the calls, Charlie. When you go to a brand new place, you are starting from scratch. And for me, when I'm birding, especially over here in Australia, you know the calls. And so it's a real pickup. When you actually hear the calls, you know what you're going to be looking and what to expect. But when you're in a brand new place, you are just on ground zero, and you're like, what is that? What is that?
Yeah.
What is that? And so that's really difficult. But I must admit, for me, for preparation, I would actually, get your field guide and go through it and have a look. And if you've got I suppose any access, you might be able to find little videos of them, especially if you're after key species of the birds that you're after. Go and have a look online somewhere and just see if you can pick up, like, just hear the call, just so that you're familiar with it as well, so that when you do come across, yeah, you have some sort of, you know, idea of what it's going to be.
Right.
Otherwise, grab a guide and, yeah, they'll take you out to the best spots.
That is the best way, actually, I think, John, to get a guide. But I mean, the other thing is, I think, this is why I advocate urban birding. If I was going to Northern Territory, I'd go to Darwin first. So I've got a cafe next door, I can have a cup of tea and all that sort of stuff, and just get to know the local birds, because the local birds will be showing themselves more openly than the birds when you actually get out into the wild. So you can actually sort of get used to a lot of the key species and some of the sort of key members of certain families. And once you've realized that you're looking, you know, at a honeyeater, or you're looking at, you know, at some kind of lorikeet or what have you, you then know that once you go into the hinterland, you kind of you already have a familiarity with types of families at least.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I've always done when I visited somewhere. I mean, for example, Australia is a classic example, but South America, the first time I went, and even now when I go, if I could recognize, say, 90% of the birds I see in Europe, that percentage drops all the way down in South America to maybe 40%. And similarly in Australia, maybe 30% even. I can recognize the classic species like the terns and some of the waders and stuff, because they actually occur in the old world or occur in you know, Europe as well. But then there's families that are totally, utterly unfamiliar. And it is a case of, well, as I say before, if you're in an urban environment, you can sit down with a cup of tea in a park, or, you know, a can of Coke, whatever, and you can actually see things in front of you, and you can actually really start to get to grips with them.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Good. Anyone else? We see that Mr. Great here he's got a question on his mind. Is your name Great? And hang on, let's just unmute you first. Hang on a sec.
I'll unmute.
So start again. Sorry, Great. No, you just unmuted yourself. Can you unmute yourself? That's it.
Yeah. No, my name's David, but my business name's Great Northern Tour, so it's got Great sitting up there. I don't know how that happened. Very new at video chats, but I'm over in Queensland, probably the high up in Australia like Luke, but over in North Queensland.
Right.
And yeah, good friends of Luke, and it's a great presentation, beautiful photography.
Well done,
Thanks,
Luke.
David. Thanks, mate.
Good. Thanks for that, David. Great. Anyone else? Has anyone actually been to Northern Territory that's not Australian? So there's lots of.
I have.
You've been to Northern Territory?
Yeah, and Queensland.
Wow.
Everywhere except the west, really. Went to Darwin, went to Kakadu.
Wow.
Didn't make it as far over as Broome. Would love to go there, but I wasn't really on a birding trip. I was on a sort of backpacking type trip, and it was brilliant. I absolutely loved it, and I would love to go back. So yeah, fantastic trip, really.
Okay, well, we'll have to plan a trip for next year then, all of us.
Yeah, if we're allowed out by then, we can afford to travel. Definitely. Okay,
all right. Anyone else for anything else? Okay, well, listen, we might as well end it here, but thank you very much, Luke, once again for coming along and talking to us about Northern Territory. It's a fantastic place, and I hope that it's whetted the appetites of all of you that haven't been before. And as I said before, look forward to seeing you all again. And don't forget to look up, yeah?
Thank you very much, David, and thank you everybody for listening in, and hopefully, enjoy it.
Good on you, Luke. Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.